Hey, everybody, this is Barry Johnson. I want to welcome you back to another edition of Studio Talk. Every day I heard one little saying from my mama, and she said, Barry, just because you can does not mean you should. So, the question today, should you build a Hackintosh in 2022? Let's get to it. Okay, all right. So about I don't know, I'm going to guess at the time frame, but I'm going to say maybe about 8 years or so ago, give or take a handful of years. Not much longer than that. Those people who definitely wanted to be on the Mac operating system for their project studio, but wanted to try to get into it with maybe a lesser expensive computer compared to the Mac Pros at the time. Once they realized they could actually build a Hackintosh, which is basically the core of a Windows PC, getting the right components and setting it up properly, that you could install, even though technically not supported by Apple, you could install the Mac OS system on it. And for all intents and purposes, it acted and behaved once it was properly built and properly set up, just like a Mac that you would buy at any store. Now, they do have some problems every once in a while when a new operating system gets upgraded, or maybe certain updates, or maybe a plugin or a DAW gets updated. It can cause a few problems, but there's always a way to work that out if you do. So there's always some compromises that you need to make, albeit they're very manageable and easy to deal with when you're doing a Hackintosh. Another thing that caused Hackintoshes to get extremely popular compared to buying a Mac is when Apple recently, made the modification. One, it started with the trash can, which had the limited ability to upgrade it. They were starting that transition to where, upgrading individual components started to get a little more difficult, although you could still do it on the trash can. But once the new towers came out, those were priced so expensively. And even though you could, interchange a lot of things on it, those got really outrageous. Now, they also got incredibly freaking powerful. But out of the practical scope of a home project studio price wise, which is why a lot of people were going more towards the spec'd out 27-inch iMac, which is a fantastic computer historically for the project studio, but not everybody wants an all-in-one. And plus, you started getting limited ability to upgrade RAM and hard drive into the iMacs, the more recent ones. So that made it a little frustrating. So, Apple charges an absolute ridiculous premium on their memory and their storage, their hard drive, whether it's an SSD traditionally or a 7,200 RPM drive. I think everything is a SSD today. But outrageously, just to the point to where it's freaking criminal. I'm just going to flat out say it. It's criminal what they do. And that's coming from a huge Mac user, huge fan of Macs. I think that one dynamic is absolutely criminal. Okay. So the bottom line is, for the longest time, Hackintoshes were absolutely viable. Not only could you run Windows on them, but you could run Mac operating system. Of course, you've always been able to run Windows for at least for a very long time. Windows on a Mac if you wanted to, either via Parallel. Today, you kind of have to use Parallel to be able to run it in a virtual mode because you don't have Boot Camp anymore as of the recent Apple Silicon. Now, will that change later on? Maybe, or is that a limitation of that technology? Now, you just heard me mention what? Apple Silicon. All right. So for the longest time, whether or not, people wanting to get into Macs and have it be a solid computer for digital audio workstation, you had to dig in your pockets, okay? Now, I'll argue, and I've got other videos over there, that if you built a properly spec'd Windows machine, ultimately, if you did it spec for spec and not part for part, Everybody likes to compare part for part, i.e., I got a CPU, you got a CPU. No, I got this CPU with these specs. Make sure you're picking a CPU that has similar or the same specs to know if we're comparing apples to apples, no pun intended. Okay, so I say okay a lot, and you're just going to have to get used to it. Okay, okay, all right. So, um, anyway, you've got this. You've got to get that properly spec'd PC if you're going to go that, or even with a Hackintosh compared to a Mac computer. Okay, your entry level Macs, just for the longest time, won't cut it. Whether that's a Mac Mini or a MacBook Air. Even historically, the entry level MacBook Pros were pushing it somewhat because those computers have always been great for your everyday computing needs, surfing the internet, Microsoft Office, simple applications like that that don't require a ton of processing. But for audio or video editing or something like that, those entry level computers were lacking, to say the least. All right. So you pretty much had to invest at least into an iMac or a MacBook Pro that puts you in the upper teens of hundreds, either, starting probably minimum of 1,500 going up to maybe 2,300, depending on whether it was a laptop or an iMac. Okay. Even you could max out the specs of a Mac Mini back with an i7, for example, but then they started limiting how far you could spec those computers out. So, what does the history of all that mean as it relates to does building a Hackintosh make sense today? Today, I'm going to argue that it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Okay, the Apple Silicon, even the entry level Mac Mini or the entry level MacBook Air, will outperform most either custom built Hackintoshes or custom built PCs. It will outperform the majority of those unless you've truly spec'd that out with max specs. Most likely that M1 is going to do a better job than just about most things that you could buy in the intermediate level of cost. So things have changed dramatically where you wouldn't consider using a Mac Mini or a MacBook Air before. Today, you can absolutely do it. Why? Because I have done it. I started using a MacBook Air probably over a year ago, and it replaced my 12-core Mac Pro. It outperformed my 12-core Mac Pro. And so it's just a screaming machine. Now, of course, today you've got to be patient because a combination of Apple Silicon's processors, as well as most, all the DAW manufacturers, all the plug-in manufacturers, all the virtual instrument manufacturers out there, not all of them are ported over to be able to take advantage of Apple Silicon. Some won't even work in Rosetta mode, although the majority of the plugins that I use and the majority of other things and DAWs and stuff that I use either are supported or work fantastic under Rosetta. So give that probably another 6 months or so and everything will change. So today, would I build a Hackintosh? No, absolutely not. I would not even consider it. I think it's a bad, bad, bad move today. I think things are going to even get more complicated as time goes on. To pretty much once Apple makes that transition to 100% silicon, which is expected to happen in 2022, completely across all of their product lines. All right, then you're going to give it a few more years until Intel just simply won't be supported anymore, or support will start to dwindle with operating systems. So keep that in mind. It is a transition. Yes, it is a pain in the butt transition, but the benefits are freaking off the charts. And I can't wait to see what they're going to be able to do with Apple Silicon when they start putting it in desktop machines, because I think they've just barely touched the surface of this technology. And I think things look very bright for us. Okay, so this has made things a lot more economical. So I would encourage you to look at Apple Silicon over building a Hackintosh in 2022. That's my advice, and I'm sticking to it. If you like the content I talk about on this channel, hit that like button, that subscribe button, and that notification bell so you know when I got a new video out. Until then, have a great day.